document. So we're hoping in the next 3 to 12 months, it will be available to everyone.
Oh, okay. I've tried writing a book. I've written a book. I know how painful that process is. At least you guys have each other to discuss, pull each other's hair, to get to the best phase, right? But if you're writing solo, it's so tough. Yeah. For me, I take really long time just to come up with the contents. Once I get it right, and that takes for me like 3 to 6 months to do it. And once I get it, I think it's much easier. Is that the same process for you guys?
I'll answer that. No, I had a sort of a lattice work that I'd been developing over the years, and when I asked Ilana to join me, I was sort of expecting a couple of lines here and there, just to not to burden her with things, give a CFO perspective. And now she's gotten excited and she's giving me a whole lot of other perspective. And neither one of us has ever done this, certainly not worked together like this, but it's hilarious because she's very steady and aggressive, and I'm up and down like literally a roller coaster. But it's a nice balance because the biggest challenge for both of us is how fast ideas come to our heads. So we're in the phase of rewriting and editing, which is hilarious to me. The flow is wonderful, Ilana. I'm really teasing you, but filtering the information into a readable, usable form for practical use, and then not dumping everything, because there's a series of books that we've already outlined that are complements to this. But that's basically how it's working. And it's sort of funny because we didn't really have a project plan. I think we're aligned. You want to do this? And she was like, yeah, let's do this. And next thing you know, here we are.
Well,
Right.
I think it's a testament to how what I strong the framework is and how useful and valuable it is. We did meet at a conference. We were both presenting separate events, and when I was done with mine, I stayed to watch his. And at the time, I was going through a pretty difficult transformation project, and I was struggling, and it's not my first rodeo, but I was really struggling. And so when I saw Vin's methodology up on screen, a gigantic light bulb went off in my head. I said, I need to steal those slides. And so I engaged Vin in a conversation in the vendor area, and I think we didn't stop talking for like an hour. And then I had to go kind of move on and do other things. And then we've stayed in touch over the past couple of years. So when he did reach out and he showed me his framework, and I could see the realm of the possibilities here. It wasn't just about adding a few sentences. It was, this has such widespread opportunity to be leveraged across the finance functions, across any industry. I mean, it's going to really set the finance world on fire, in my belief. And so that's when I decided I'm not just going to give you a couple of practicing CFO perspectives. I'm all in. So I threw my chips in, and I'm betting everything that this is going to change the world.
That's right. For the audience who don't know, Ilana is like, if you have been to any of the finance conferences, you must know Ilana. She's everywhere in every conference, every event. She's there, and she's amazing at networking. She's amazing at bringing these people together. She comes from being the practitioner. She's the CFO, and now I meet Vin through her, and Vin comes from the buyer side, from the vendor side, with this experience. And I got so excited when I heard that they both are writing a book about finance transformation. The common thing for three of us, I think we all three have a love and hate relationship towards finance transformation. I've done extensive research on finance transformation for large companies, and it's quite a drama that happens when a company goes through finance transformation, or at least they say, okay, every 3 4 years they'll say, okay, we're coming up with finance transformation. And over the years, I've seen a template that is built. Any company, any industry, how they do finance transformation, it starts like a small discussion, right? Oh, and then it eventually ends up somehow to come up with a planning tool or revamp your planning tool, because that's probably the first step that everyone sees. And then you also go into AP process, ER process, and taking a look at what all your gaps are. At that point, it gets very overwhelming for whoever is doing it, right? That's when they bring someone from external to do finance transformation, and that's when all this drama starts. But this is a cycle that I think every company has to go through. And this is like a cleanup. This is like a spring cleanup that we do. For every 3 4 years, we have these processes that gets accumulated organically. And how do we clean up this process? How do we make all these efficiencies to take a look? That's why I got so excited when we were all talking about finance transformation. But tell me one strange story of yours about finance transformation.
Strange story. Ilana, give me a moment because he just delivered a lot of very interesting stuff that I could talk through. But the question you just asked is an interesting one. I have so many. My favorite is an individual that was running a transformation project at a fairly sizable organization. And he was struggling because they weren't really appreciating the fact that they were asking essentially upwards of 70 divisional CFOs to do their work differently. So they had an overall centralized corporate motivation or agenda or the why for this project. But as I dug in a little bit and discovered they didn't really associate that with the agendas per se of individual CFOs. So those people were pushing back. They were having conversations with regards to should we buy this technology, own this technology, should we move off this technology? And I simply went in and said, you don't have a technology problem, you have a story problem. And the story problem is a reflection of the fact that you have your story, but you've not aligned that story to anybody else. And you've got over 70 divisional CFOs that have their own story. So the real problem isn't technology transformation in your project. The real problem is whose story are you telling? And does that story align to their story? And the moment you start to figure out what the story is of the folks that are out there doing the work at the divisional level, you'll start to get more buy-in. Because if you don't have that buy-in, the technology doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So it all boils down to this. People will say in all the books you read on change, develop the why, develop the why. Well, what's the why? And so I came out and started to look at this through the lens of software sales and merging all these different ideas and concepts into why would I buy this technology? And it boils down to change and transformation. There's other stories to tell, but that one strikes me as very useful because it's this idea of a story and a narrative, but not centralized, expanding out into overlap and get people to buy in because they know what's in it for them.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that the most common thing I see is, we will implement a solution. We'll go from manual to automated, right? Let's say we go from Google Forms and we put in, and I'll just call out an expense management system. And then we roll it out and we do all of the usual change management, and our end users end up saying, well, this is more difficult than if we were just using Google Form, or I like the way it used to be done, or this doesn't allow me to split, and I'm making this up, it doesn't allow me to split things the way I need it to be split. It doesn't allow me to do X, Y, or Z. And then everybody gets spun up trying to create an independent customized fixes. One thing is we also tend to over customize a solution versus configure something that's off the shelf. Okay, then we go to all these conferences and we see there's another expense management system, or there's 2 or 3 others, and we get really mesmerized by someone's demo and all of these new key features that weren't included in the software that we implemented. And then we keep layering these upgrades and what we call transformations on top of each other without fundamentally asking the why of why is the user not adopting? Why can't we do something? Did we over customize? And we end up with these Frankenstein systems that, as you mentioned, every 3 to 4 years, we have to clean house. We shouldn't have to clean house if we didn't build Frankenstein systems. And we wouldn't build Frankenstein systems if we kept the work that we're doing organically clean and simple to do what we want them to do. And then we layer technology on top of that. We kind of get the cart before the horse.
Sure. One of the interesting stories, finance transformation story for me is I led a finance transformation project. The whole goal is to reach a metric. We spent all the money, we did the project. We didn't reach the goal of that metric. It was a little short. And later it was decided by the leadership it's not worth doing it because we didn't even reach it. So all the money is just gone waste by doing it. So it's good that metric driven, and it's also good in that project that I realized some things, if we can't do it, I think we should just let it be like that rather than trying to change everything just for the sake of changing.
Now that's hard to do, especially when, now the big push is AI. Well, we'll just have AI do it. Well, what are you going to give AI instructions to do? What value is it going to add? So even when you layer AI on top of a broken process or an inefficient process, you get broken and inefficient faster with potential hallucinations and all of the risk that comes with AI. And so the basic premise of the book is really understand what is the purpose of the work that you're doing. How do you want to use the resources of the organization first? And Vin will talk about the four aspects of the value diamond that we're going to be including in the book. And then ask yourself, what is it that we're trying to fix and why? And then why a particular solution is needed. But you have to ask yourself some fundamental questions before you even get into the discussion of finding a solution.
So it's brilliant. So there's something that I just want to fill in here from the technology side, technology vendor side. People think they're selling technology. People think they're buying technology. And that really is at the fundamental root of the biggest problem. And so what I've introduced with Ilana now, this nice little rounded out framework based on years of experience of hers and mine, to suggest that your mindset has to change. What exactly are you delivering value on? The software? No, the change. And so when we focus on the change, now we can start to define the change, but there's a critical way to define the change that's missing. People are in love with efficiency. They want to make a process efficient. I want to ignore that concept for the moment because what I'm really after is business outcomes. And so they're related, right? But efficiency alone is not a driver. So Peter Drucker says, and I shared this with Ilana, and it'll be in our book, there's nothing more crazy than doing efficiently that which should not be done. So that which should not be done is defined by what? It's defined by the outcomes produced. And so when someone says, I want to be a strategic CFO, there's only one way to do it. There's only one variable that drives whether or not you are or are not a strategic CFO, what your teams do or don't do with their attention. So if somebody's paying attention to balancing the checkbook, but they do it really efficiently, the business impact is simply a balanced checkbook. But if I put that on autopilot and I move that person's attention over to the next merger and acquisition or acquisition and what is the valuation, the value of that day's work is completely different and ultimately much bigger. So the idea of value and the idea of efficiency don't really work if you consider the fact that finance transformation fails because people are not repurposing this service they provide to the internal customer. They're not reestablishing an expectation as the CFO being more of a profit center. The bottom line is people are buying technology and calling it transformation. And then they're sitting back, vendors included, and wondering, how come our software is so ill-adopted? Why aren't people using all of our features and functions? Well, because you sold technology and they bought technology. Nobody ever really gave a lot of consideration to the change that was going to need to happen in order to get value from it.
One of the things that I want to ask you both is, I agree with what you said in terms of we need to get the process right, and then we can layer AI or any kind of automation on top of it. And this has been my thought as well for a really long time. But last few years, as you know, I work on AI, implementing AI in finance. What I've seen is, let's say if you do 100 different tasks in finance, and 60 of them are the real process that you need, and 40 of them, as you said, can be improved or can be eliminated. It really takes a lot of effort to figure out which 40 you can take it out and which 60 you have to stay. But now with AI, if it becomes much easier for you to replicate all these 100 processes in AI, do you really want to spend time and effort? And you know how much effort it is to identify, to do the process improvements, right? Do we really want to wait till we clean up the house? Or can we just go with this AI transformation and then start cleaning up? Because now you have much more visibility with AI doing it. And I don't think there's an answer for it, at least, which I didn't get an answer for it so far with my practice, that what we are doing. Have you seen anything like this?
I can take that, a little bit of that. So I think it's multi-directional, and your question has answers that are multidimensional. That is, I actually believe AI can work to help you find those pockets of waste for sure. But you want to be careful about using AI too prematurely, because at a minimum, you want to get an understanding of what my teams do, what they don't do, and what's the business impact. Now, it doesn't have to be at a granular level, but the starting point, in my view, is that core foundation of what are people doing and how does it impact the organization? And then you start to measure where you'd like to have tweaks. AI can help you actually assess it. And then AI can start to fill in some of the gaps. And one of the key areas that Ilana talked about a little bit ago was you're buying all this stuff and you're not using it, and you have all these different things and you're trying to piece it all together. AI can actually help you piece it together and sit on top of these layers. But the problem I see is everybody's jumping into AI without contemplating that one basic concept. How is this improving what my teams are able to give their attention to, right? So you suggest that 60 steps are good, 40 steps are bad. I would argue at a surface level, at least at a team level, need to understand what kind of work are you doing, and then you measure it against what Ilana was referring to, this concept of a value diamond, and say, what is this doing to drive shareholder value, drive the CEO's ability to actually execute a strategy? If you don't do that, what you're really going to do is layer more work on top of what's already sort of a burden.
What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would just create an analogy or a metaphor for people to envision. We keep thinking transformation is going to solve a gaping wound, right? And we think we have a wound and we're going to put, some massive, gauze on top of it. But when we look at the wound and we start investigating, we realize, well, it's just a little cut. It's not going to need stitches. And instead of this massive gauze, what you need is a very large Band-Aid. right? But we spend all this investment and I want the biggest gauze, I want the most perks of the gauze, and it needs to be a name brand gauze when all you really needed was a band-aid. And I think the AI is like that. AI will do great things. It is doing great things right now, and we see a lot of experts coming on how to help implement AI in an organization. But we need to make sure that what we're applying is a band-aid on a scratch and not this big elaborate gauze on something that doesn't need it. And so applying the right AI solution to the right problem is critical. And then AI can do its thing and it can help us be more efficient. As Vin talks about, we all want to be more efficient, and then allows us to redirect or prioritize other things that need a bigger than a band-aid or that are more important.
Right. And when I say efficiency is not necessarily the end state, it's a means to the end state. So the end state is what we're really after. And if you can measure against that end
Measure
state
efficiency is a
constantly,
hard thing to measure. Outcomes, which Vin is emphasizing, are things that you can touch and taste and see.
Right.
And we get, I think, a little bit blinded on the nebulous, and we want to reinforce that we need to be looking at very tangible things, and outcomes can be measured.
that's a good example if you want one on this. You can go ahead, Ashoka. Sorry, I have an example that brings this point home.
It's a big elephant in the room if you're talking about ROI and finance transformation. That discussion actually starts with an ROI as well. What's your take on ROI? And I know you have a great framework within your book that is coming up. I'm looking forward to see that framework as well so that we can apply for AI transformation. What's your take on the ROI part of it?
This is definitely a Vin question. Go!
We're going back and forth with each other on the concept of the title. The title to me in some way has to be something as follows: How ROI Broke Finance Transformation. Why? And this is going to rattle people a little bit because you should understand my background as a certified public accountant. So I understand the importance of return on investment. The problem with it is at the mindset level, not the math level. If we believe the I equals investment in something, we're measuring the return on that something, which is universally the technology. Now, I've seen people say, do the ROI of change. I say, just get rid of the I and call it return on change. Because now what I'm driving is the value of change, not the value of the technology. Many implications for this. One of them is I move past the implementation because the tool is just a tool. I'm looking for the value of change, which means my focus is on the actual change, not on the technology. But it's because we're focused on the I, doing a calculation of what can that technology deliver for me in terms of a process improvement. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll start with one. I am going to close the books faster. So let's say I'm pre-IPO. Right now, my accounting process is a colossal mess. So I do an ROI on the process fix. I now close my books more efficiently, more effectively. So my math says, what is the return on that process fix? Well, I gave you some direction into what return on change would do, and that is I'm pre-IPO. If I don't fix my process, I'm not going to get the IPO. What is the value of the IPO? Well, the value of the IPO could be $500 million. So my return on change is $500 million. It's not 125K on fixing the accounting process, right? So this seems like common sense. It's just not common thought. It isn't difficult, but people get myopic in terms of that ROI bit. And I'm saying you shouldn't even look at technology until you understand, what do I expect to achieve if I fix that group over there for the group and for the greater whole of the organization? What is the return to me at the board and shareholder level if I fix this process?
Ilana, I mean, theoretically, I agree with Win, but do you think your board will agree if you say this transformation, now the ROI is like $500 million? Will they buy into that vision of ROC?
Using the framework that we lay out in the books, absolutely. And we lay out the framework in the book from A to B to C to D, and how to communicate to all of this to the board. And I think when the logic of return on change is explained, it's a path that no one's going to go backwards on. We're not saying that financial metrics, the things that we grew up with as we learned accounting and as we came up through finance, we're not saying that they're silly or that they're nonsense, and ROI will still be a metric that will be used in the business. We are just saying that it's not necessarily the right metric for transformation and change. And so where Vin feels strongly that how ROI broke business transformation, I'm looking at it as ROC is the missing metric in ensuring sustainable change and transformation. So we will duke it out, and everybody who's interested in this book can reach out to us, and we'll add you to our pre-sales list so that we can we can share with everybody where we land on the final title.
I'm very excited for that. The reason is we do AI implementation at companies, right? And then what we have seen so far, we still haven't seen any resources that got impacted because of AI, whichever what we have done, right? Even though we saved, let's say, 80 hours a week, or probably more, 200 hours a week resource actually started doing something else in the same
Yes.
company. And now, if we start doing ROI calculations, how do you even justify that project, right? So it's on our side how we are projecting that, and it's also on the company, on the finance people. They say, yeah, we see the change that happened, but we don't know how to show it to our board, how to show it to our CFO. So this discussion is amazing because now I think we'll have a framework. I'm looking forward for this framework so that we can put that in our slides as well, what we should.
Well, we actually deliver a framework that you can use to calculate the return on change
That's right.
so that you can explain. We talk about theoretically the future of finance is all about upskilling, reskilling, and using AI to put people doing more strategic work, right? We talk about at a minimum, AI is really about the low-hanging fruit, doing the tactical, repetitive work that no human really wants to do as a career. And then people get really scared. Well, that's going to replace me. No, that's going to replace the work that you didn't want to do in the first place, right? And it does free you up. And we have a framework that will actually calculate what it frees up, the cost of what it frees up, and where you can reapply that work. And one of the things with AI, and it's one of my biggest frustrations, is when people, especially when people say that it's going to replace people, you still need a human judgment to evaluate the output. And I'm not saying error check. I'm not saying sitting there and audit what comes out, although you do have to kind of eyeball it to make sure that it's not hallucinating. What I'm saying is that you can then shift these valuable resources to doing value-added work that actually moves the strategic dial and that enhances the output and outcomes of the organization. I think it's going to do great things for the accounting profession, and it's going to motivate a lot of people to go back into the accounting profession because they're not going to be doing the silly things that AI could do for them. They are going to have to upskill and reskill to be doing way more strategic work, more value-added work, and we will still need the humans to do that.
Right.
An important consideration in all of this, which is brilliant to me, is the narrative, communication, and the story. So a big element of my history, and now it's blowing up really nicely with Ilana. One of the biggest elements is, what's the story I'm telling? I told you earlier in that communication, right? So you're suggesting, are the board really going to believe it? No, not in the way it's presented today. The narrative has to change. And really, the model is built to create that narrative that brings in that pre-IPO assessment. Basically, you're talking now cost of inaction.
Right.
Inaction, not cost of not purchasing software. It's inaction. What if I don't change the way I do things? It's real, and you make it tangible by moving past this idea of we want people to do more strategic work. What I'm suggesting, and what now Ilana and I are suggesting, is put that down on paper somewhere. Write down, what does that mean? So what we're doing is we're enabling the thought, and then we're enabling the communication. And this is a really important point, because if you look at it as a DNA piece, everything's there, but this one little piece, how do I connect what Millie, the accounting clerk down the hall, does as it relates to what the board of directors cares about? And my point is, everything should be connected. And the question then becomes how? And that's the question we're answering.
Right.
On top of a bunch of others.
One of the interesting metric that came out of this is earlier, all the finance software are seat-based, right? Like you said, okay, we need 20 people access, so we're going to charge you by 20 people. But with AI, what happened is the number of people that need access to AI actually has reduced a lot. You only probably need few people to have access, because now each person is running their own agents, their set of agents to get things done. You don't need 20 people to have access to it. So just something that came from the AI transformation is there'll be less number of people, but very well-defined roles in terms of process owners. So they know they are responsible for the output of that specific process. Whether it's AI generated, they're supposed to verify it. But since now they are in the verification part, they can actually do it for more process. So one person will own multiple processes and get that done. On that note, one of the biggest problem that we see, and I've seen this in finance transformation, and now I'm seeing in AI, is the discovery phase of finance transformation is the painful part of it, right? Do you have anything in your book which talks about discovery?
Yes, I do.
How to go about it?
Go ahead, Ilana.
Okay. What you said about the vendor is very interesting. And what this is going to require is the vendor side is going to fundamentally have to change how they sell and how they're compensated and what their go-to-market is. It does mean that going from seat-based to enterprise-based, or enterprise, there are some software that will say, you're too small for us, right? Because we want the $500 million or higher or enterprise organization. And you might be $100 million or a $50 million organization, right? And they won't give you the time of day because you don't fit into their. So this is what you just said is going to fundamentally change or require a mindset change from the vendor about how they approach their customers and who their customers are. And part of the return on change, which will be more covered in book 2, is it's going to change consentive plans. It's going to change their sales metric. It's going to change the way demos are performed and when demos are performed, how demos are performed. It's going to change how you make contact. And that's going to be critical in this evolution of AI and of the changing needs of the customer. Right. Go, Vin.
So you asked about discovery. And so in a typical software situation, people do, here's a sales process, prospect qualified discovery demo. And this discovery process is a version of the Spanish Inquisition where a seller comes in and just starts asking all these random questions. What they're not paying attention to is the person on the other end of those questions has no context for the questions, but even if they did, they don't really have the answers. So what a vendor can do, and then I'll shift back to the CFO side, what a vendor can do because of their experience is actually help people do real discovery for themselves. So right now, the vendor says, I need to do discovery so I can do a demo. What actually needs to happen is the vendor needs to take their resources and enable checklists and consultant partners to help people sift through what's really going on here and what is the bigger picture. So the key element for a CFO is very, very simple and based on a very simple concept. The value the CFO delivers is based exclusively on what he or she has a team do with their time or do not do with their time. So once you understand that metric, you can go into Six Sigma, you can go into Lean, you can go into any sort of one of these process methodologies, and you have to look beyond the process. You have to look at activity in the shade. We're going to agree on what we're going to call it because we're going to call it something, but there's disruption that's happening because of disconnectedness. And if you think process first, you're going to miss a lot of this stuff that's happening in the shade. But the point is, the reason you start there is because if you're thinking outcome-based, the only thing that matters is what's either getting done or not getting done. And that's when you start to really see things holistically. But the consideration that I forgot to mention, and Ilana touches on this quite a bit in her thinking, is I want to get away from the word transformation. I want to start talking about evolution. And when you look at the definition of the word evolve, it's a progression. You don't finish. Transformation says, I'm going to be done in 2 years. Evolution says, I'm just going to continuously get better. How? By consistently assessing what's either getting done or not getting done against our value story, shareholder requirements, the board of director and CEO strategy. And you're constantly looking at what do we really need to get done, not based on compliance and control alone, but based on this holistic picture. And it's important. This is a really important question. It does require a little bit of work, but on the back end of it, you now know what you're getting and why, and you can manage and lead to it versus just turning on some software product. It's a fundamental shift in how these initiatives unfold. And what I'm driving at is I was selling software and people were not using the software. It kind of annoyed me. And I was trying to figure out, well, why is this? Oh, and then I came to the conclusion that they actually think the software is going to do the job for them. In some capacity, it does. In most, it does not. So the assessment is the discovery, and it's really basic. Just look at what people do or don't do. However, link it to what needs to happen at that top line. The mission of the organization.
Ilana, from your perspective, in terms of you have gone through multiple finance transformation, how do you discover that process that needs to be changed, that needs to be transformed? Is there a mechanism for you to think through, okay, now I'm going to have all these functional heads and I'll ask them about their problems and I'll list it out. Do you have a mechanism to do that process?
We do that, and you'll have to get the book to get and that I'm just joking about that. But yes, there is a process. It is going right to the source of the people who are doing the work. And they're the ones who are going to tell you, I don't understand why we do this. And you use all those consulting tools like the 5 whys. And when you get to the root cause, you realize we're doing this because someone made a mistake 10 years ago and they added this process. And then I was just told that I needed to do this, right? Okay. We prepare this report because someone 3.5 years ago said that they needed something for the board and we started doing it. We just assumed that we were going to keep on doing it until they told us to stop, right? We'll stop doing it and see if anyone complains. You find a lot of things that are added because the lawyers told us, or it's a compliance, or I went to a conference and someone said this was a best practice. And when you start getting to the root cause analysis, you realize that there is a lot of work that's being done that doesn't need to be done. And it's important that you eliminate anything that just doesn't add value, that is not part of the outcome, that can be redeployed in other areas, that can use tools that already exist. And then once you get to your baseline, then you decide what is the solution that needs to be applied on top of that.
Right. That makes sense. It's a great conversation. We can't wait to get hold of your book. And I want to make you much more responsible for the output when it's going to come out. So can we expect this summer, 2026, for the book to be released?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes, because we're that close. So yes.
All
The
right.
only variable in that is the publishing side of things, which we're working out, but we're very close. So I would say, yeah,
And if you're a publisher and you're
probably
hearing this,
by the summer.
yeah, if you're a publisher and you're hearing this and you're getting your interest or your interest is piqued, certainly reach out to us. And both Vincent and I are on LinkedIn, and we look forward to connecting with anyone who wants to learn more about return on change.
Thank you. Thanks, Ilana. Thanks, Wayne.